All right, well, welcome everyone, and thank you, Darren, for the opportunity to present today. I'm hoping that what I go through is timely for everyone. This whole COVID-19 thing has permeated every part of our life. It's changed the way we work, it's practically shut down our ability to socialise, and it's going to impact the way we're economically governed for quite a while ahead. But one of the great adages that we try and work to is that tough times never last, but tough people do. So, by that, I don't mean that you need to be some sort of Clint Eastwood type tough guy from a movie, but being able to tough it out, it means that you need to have a couple of things in place. You need to have a positive mindset that things will be fine. And secondly, you need to have a plan to get through it. That will get you through. There are plenty of positive things we can do. And in the grand scheme of things, we're already a fair way through this whole COVID thing, hopefully towards the back end of it, who knows. So this presentation is all about what we can do to weather the rest of the storm that we're already in, and what we can do to be ready for the road ahead, and to definitely be better prepared for anything else that comes along in the future. So who's the presentation for? Well, it's specifically about actions and strategies we can take in the here and now to get through a particularly troubling time. I think by now, most of us know how COVID's affecting us directly. But here's the thing, we still don't have a clear view of where it's going to take us from here. And while COVID is a health issue, it's rapidly becoming a financial issue. Businesses are slowing down, jobs are being lost or reduced, and governments all around the world are eating into massive amounts of public funding to keep things going. So there's no doubt that most of us have, at the very least, become acutely aware of our finances. Some of us maybe because we've taken a direct hit to our income or our financial well-being, and others simply because we've just become aware of how something so out of the blue, yet so significant, can hold us all to account. So if nothing else, it's a bit of a reality check for all of us, and certainly from a financial well-being perspective. So there's a really good crew with us today. So I'm hoping that you're all taking a proactive approach to this, and you're looking to uncover some ideas to get you to a better place, at the very least financially speaking. And if the fallout from COVID's taught us anything, it is that future-proofing our financial security is absolutely imperative and one of the best things you can ever do. We're going to go through a whole range of strategies for us as we sit there, even potentially some of us that fall into this category here. I did get a laugh when I saw this on my Insta feed. I thought it was quite hilarious. And while a lot of us have probably been in this boat at some point in our life, we certainly don't need to live there or be there anymore. So I'm hoping that I can put forward some practical strategies that are going to make a significant difference for where you're at right now. That said, there's no magic wands, there's no crystal balls, there's no rabbits out of the hat, but there are straightforward strategies and good guidance to get you to where you want to be. So what I want to do is build a little roadmap of where we can, or what we have to do to get to that wonderful place where we don't have to worry about our finances. So trying to put it all together, and this is what today's presentation is all about, what are the 4 key moves that we can make to get to where we want to be? Well, the first thing we can do is what I consider to be COVID cope strategy. It's all about circling the wagons. If you are struggling, if something has happened to you either personally or your business is struggling, there are resources that we can lean on. So the COVID cope strategies are things like government support, debt relief, and even the ability to access your super if you're in that situation. Secondly, the next thing we can do is to protect our super and position our investments. It's about protecting what we've got at the moment. We've all got something, whether it's super, investments, property, whatever it might be. So making sure that we can build a wall around that to the best effect and position it for the recovery ahead. Thirdly, it's all about putting some acceleration strategies in place, working out what are your goals and the best strategies that are available to you. If nothing else, what a good financial advisor will do, and there's 3 of us on board today, is that what we want to do is build out like a buffet table of choice for you so that we can tell you what's on the menu. You can browse the buffet table and see what works for you. We can tell you what the pros and cons of all of them are, and you can hand select what's going to work for you to get you to where you want to be. It's all about optimizing your cash flow, minimizing taxes, protecting your position. And the next thing we can then do is go into building financial resilience. So stage 4 is becoming financially resilient, being money secure. And what we want to do there is create a framework for financial resilience. And what that's going to do, if we can get those 4 things in play today, we can pull it all together into a roadmap for success. And by that definition, you've got the money thing sorted. And my definition of having the money thing sorted is that your money is working as hard as you are. Your wealth is growing through an automated investment and saving strategy. You know how much you need to achieve your goals and what you need to do to get there. And the main one, you stop worrying about it and you hardly ever think about it. So why do we need it? First thing I want to do is just cover off a couple of things. A disclaimer. Now, all financial advisors need to put forward a disclaimer. It's actually genuinely important to go over it, because whilst today's plan is to cover off some key financial strategies that really do work, it's important that you understand it's only general information. It's not personal advice, and you need to get some professional guidance before you act upon any of it. So moving ahead, one of the things that I wanted to put it into context for you is the reality is that even before Corona hit, statistically, nearly 2/3 of Australians are either stressed or concerned about money. And the thing is, money does matter. It determines how we live, how stressed we do or don't feel, and what options we have, both now and in the future. We worry about money regularly. You can see here from the slide that 2/3 of us worry about money either every day, weekly or monthly, whatever it might be. But it's not just the people that are struggling. Nearly 1/3 of people that have over $1 million in investable assets also worry about money at least monthly. And the bulk of the reason is simply because you just don't know where you're at. Can I afford this? Can I do that? Do I have enough to retire? When can I retire? It's basically the unknown, and good advice will uncover all of that for you. And it plays out in a couple of different ways. You can see that over half of Aussies are struggling or having some sort of adverse effect on their mental health or their relationships at home or at work with friends, whatever it might be, because they are worried about money. And getting it sorted actually does some significant things. It's improved people's financial well-being on the obvious side. So you've got more money, you know where you're at. But the benefits go far beyond just having more money. It's many others, and probably more important, other aspects of your lives have been enhanced by getting good advice. For a lot of people, it's simply a case of you just don't know what you don't know. For others, they want to do it, they don't know where to start. But for most of us, we are, even with the best the best intentions or whatever, we just don't have the time or the inclination to put the best laid plans into place, and inevitably they just slip onto the never never. So you can see here that good advice gets you to better places. So what I want to do now is start stepping through some of the things we can do. The first one, if you remember the roadmap we just went through, it's all about circling the wagons to protect yourself from the situation you're in now. We're well into this situation, so I'm not going to go through all of it. We're all aware of JobKeeper and how it works. There is support out there from governments and banks to help you out. They're offering numerous financial support packages, including wage assistance, cash flow boost. So if you are a business owner, I know a lot of us are here, there's all sorts of things you can do. You can go further and look to some of your suppliers, whether it's people that provide your mortgage, your loan, your credit card. There's fee waivers, deferrals. I really suggest that you go and check your interest rate with your broker or your advisor to make sure you're on the best possible wicket there. Consider using options like rolling over to a cheaper, interest-free rate credit card for a period of time. You can even go to some of these providers like for rental relief. Now, I'm not sure which side of the equation you might be on, the giving or the receiving end of needing rental relief. So read up on your options and make contact with your landlord, or speak to your tenants if you're in that situation. There's also situations to request financial hardship around bills, whether it's your phone, gas, electricity, whatever it might be. Even some car insurers are starting to offer up some discounts and concessions. I got a gift card from my car insurer the other day. So don't ask, don't get. There are things we can do out there. But if you are in a situation where you need any of these things, speak to your accountant, speak to your financial advisor, do some research. There's plenty of options out there, but we're well into it. So I'm going to take it that most of us have our head around it. And I'm going to move on to the next sort of area that we can look at. And one of the key things is that there is this opportunity now to withdraw super. So even still, you can withdraw another $10,000 out of your super fund if you want. There's been a lot of press coverage about this is a really bad idea, and it can have a significantly detrimental effect on where your future savings will end up. And in isolation, they're absolutely right. So what I want to do is go through this situation. So you're allowed to, well, you could have withdrawn $20,000, but certainly still another $10,000 but I want to show you a graph of how that all plays out. So if you had this situation here where you had a starting super balance of $100,000, you're on a salary of say 80,000, so it's a fairly conservative situation, and we're looking at returns of 7%. If you don't withdraw your money versus withdraw it, you can see that whilst it doesn't look like much more than a sliver on your projections for your retirement, potentially over 20 years, you can see it nearly takes out $100,000 out of your super savings. And you know, if you're say a 30-year-old or a 35-year-old, it could be 30 years of negative impact, and it's going to cost you up to $175,000, maybe $200,000 in the long term. So on the face of it, you would absolutely suggest that it is not a good idea whatsoever. But I do want to put it into context for you. If your situation is that you're flat out struggling and you've exhausted all other options, you've got no choice, then do it, because it's going to get you through the storm. So that's absolutely fine. You also might have a compelling need for it, paying off a horrible credit card debt or keeping the kids in private school, whatever it might be. If it needs to be done, it needs to be done. But you know what you can do about it? If you have the ability to pull out some money out of super and put it to really good, well-considered effect, and then have a plan that over the next 6 to 12 months, you're going to put it back by maybe salary sacrifice and actually using that as a really positive way to get a great tax deduction, it could actually play out well in your favor. But I would caution you all that it's something you really have to put some thought into. It's case-by-case study, and there is merit in both sides, but on a conservative basis, I would say that if you don't need to, you wouldn't do it. So that's your super. You have the ability to sneak a little bit out if you need to. You do have to tick a few boxes to get there, but some people can do it. But most of us do have super in play already. So what I want to look at now is what you can do with your super. We've all got something at the moment, probably may or may not have in personal share investments as well. You can see on this graph here that over the last year, the market was churning along quite nicely. Then COVID kicked in, and from a high of over 7,000 points, it fell to a low in March of around 4,500. It was a massive fall, but in the next couple of months through to the end of June, it picked up reasonably well. In fact, the US market is already back to all-time highs. But the reality is that the market is all over the shop at the moment. The corona pandemic has created the largest daily fluctuations in the market since the Great Depression. And for many of the days through March and April, we were seeing daily fluctuations of 5%. So it's really difficult to predict. We don't know where it's going. But the thing is, we just don't have a clear picture of how or when the pandemic is going to go away. And while investment market volatility continues, we need to look at what this means for our super and our investments, and more importantly, our retirement savings, whether that's 10, 20 or 30 years away. We're actually expecting an announcement later today where we're going to find that we're now officially in recession, and it's the first recession we've had since the recession we had to have back in the 90s. And it's the biggest drop in GDP that Australia has seen since the Depression. So it doesn't sound great. And on top of that, if you do some research into economic forecasting, there's conflicting messages everywhere. They've got some market experts that are suggesting that we're on the precipice of another big collapse because we've just stretched too many resources. And other market experts have suggested, well, we've already factored all of the downside of corona into the market pricing. And so it can only be upside from here. So it really is confusing. Bottom line, no one really knows. And I would really worry if someone said to you, I know where it's going to go. But you know what? It's not all bad news. Interest rates are at all-time lows. Australian corporate businesses, balance sheets at the big end of town are generally really strong. And Australia as a government or as a country has a really strong financial position. I'm hoping that a vaccine or some sort of medical solution will come along and eventually we can return back to life as normal. But until then, and even when it does happen, what can we be doing about it? Should we be changing our investments? Should we be selling? And this applies to all of us, whether we've got personal investments or our super, whatever it might be. So what I want to do is put it into context. First of all, if you have a look at this graph, what's done is done. There are no do-overs. We can't rewind the tape. We don't have a crystal ball to predict where we're going from. So we can only work on what we know in the here and now and what we can control. If you have a look at this graph here, this is the Australian Stock Exchange over the last 20 years. You can see it has absolutely been a roller coaster. And 10 years ago, we had this massive situation over here where I'll just bring up my laser pointer. You can see that we had this absolute exuberant level of growth. Then we had the GFC collapse, and a pretty quick rebound, a little bit of moderation, but then it carried on its merry way. But over 20 years, despite the fact that it is up and down like a yo-yo, I actually think this line is remarkably straight. I think it's done really well. Let's have a look at how, that's 20 years of the Australian stock market. Have a look at it over 110 years. The Australian, or the share markets around the world have weathered so many storms, whether it's the Great Depression, the Spanish flu, a couple of world wars. We had the 87 share market crash here, where it fell by 50% almost in a day, biggest ever we've had. We've got the global financial crises, we've had tech wrecks, terrorist attacks all over the place. But you can see that, again, the long-term range is reasonably linear. So what I want to do is put this in context. So let's say if we go back to the GFC, which happened back here, have a look at the tale of 3 different investors. And I think this is one of the most compelling graphs I've ever seen. Let's say you're watching your share markets growing. You had a great time in the lead up to the GFC in 2007, one of the longest bull runs we'd ever had. And then it fell massively through the financial crisis. You just watched your shares or your super falling. You're pulling your hair out. You're going crazy. You get to this point here and you make a decision. A lot of people said, that's it. My savings, my retirement, it's just going up in smoke. I can't stand it anymore. I'm going to pull it out. I'm going to sell out. I'm going to go into cash. The market is not for me. And I'm going to stay in cash. And over the next 10 years, they stayed in cash. And you can see where they've ended up with, if you started with $100,000, they're down to half of where they were. They've locked in all of their losses. Someone else came along and said, oh my God, I can't believe that my investments and my super is falling so badly. I'm selling out cash and I'm going to stop this bleeding that's happening, and I'm going to wait for a year to make sure the market's coming along nicely. Oh, it looks like it's recovering. Okay, I'm going to jump back on board. So they get back on the bandwagon and they do the recovery that comes along, and they get a reasonably good level of recovery. The smart investor who had good guidance, good advice, and understood the dynamics of how the world works said, well, what's done is done. Didn't see it coming. I'm here and now. I can't do anything more about it. And they rode the recovery that inevitably always comes. And we saw in the last slide, 11 major crashes over 110 years. Every one of them has recovered. Most of them, I think 9 out of the 11 recovered within a year. So it does happen. And you can see this person's gone on to nearly 2.5 times their money. They've got $250,000. So I think that's a great lesson. You have to stay in the market. The upshot is that you can't afford to sell out at the wrong time. As I say in the classics, it's all about time in the market, not timing the market. So let's have a look at how this is played out for the average US investor. I saw a study that I thought was particularly interesting. Over the last 20 years to 2016, the American share market, the Standard & Poor's top 500 companies, has averaged 7.7% return. The average investor, however, has only averaged 4.8% return. That's a gap of 2.9. We call that the behavior gap, and that's simply because people have been jumping in and out of markets. They've been trying to react, preempt, do whatever they thought was the right thing at the time, but it didn't work. And because they don't have a crystal ball, it just hasn't played out. So if you stay the course, it can work. So no one has a crystal ball. So success definitely has and will come from our ability to focus on the things we can control. Now, I've got quite a few mates that are stockbrokers, and they don't mind having a bit of a dig at it, but I do find this amusing, and there is to some extent a bit of truth in this, that this is how a good cartoon sees how stockbrokers work. And I think that there's something to it. So, but the point of it, whilst we can have a bit of a giggle at the market's expense, what we're trying to say out of this, it's all about saying we need to work with what we can control and avoid or not worry about the things we can't control. So what are these things? What do we have control over? Well, there's some things we have absolutely no influence or control over. And they're things like investment markets, legislation, exchange rates, and interest rates. Anyone that tells you they can predict those things, I would run a mile. It's just been proven time and time again. No one has any idea. There are some things we can influence to some extent, and they're things like what your goals and objectives are and your discipline for staying the course and sticking to the plan. Some things we can totally control, and this is where you and a good advisor will come into play. We can pick the strategy and advice that works best for you. We can carefully consider the investments you make. We can make sure you're diversified, stay disciplined, and along the journey, minimize your tax and the costs go along with it. Some of the things we can do in terms of the control and getting to further places, we can look beyond Aussie markets, and a lot of the investors I see have nothing beyond an Australian share portfolio. And you can see here, there is a massive difference with the American market versus the Australian market. Over the last little while, they have done so much better. They're kind of 3 times where we're at the moment. We've averaged, I think, somewhere around, I'll bring up the figures now. The Australian Stock Exchange here has averaged over the last 10 years minus a 7.7 return. Whereas if you look at things, say, for example, the American market, or particularly the NASDAQ, which is these FANGs here, which are things like tech stocks of Facebook, Apple, Amazon, Netflix and Google, Microsoft, whoever it might be, they have done phenomenally well. In a time where the Australian market did -8, they have done +34, and they're just going on to strength after strength after strength. So you need to sit down with a good advisor and work out, well, what sort of strategies are going to work best for me? Some of the portfolios that I've looked at, and one of the big discussion points amongst advisors is looking at the whole notion of passive versus active investing. So some of the funds that I work at take my money and invest it broadly across the Australian share market, and invest where and how the market goes. The market goes up, I go up, I'm completely in lockstep with the market. An active approach is putting your money with investors or advisors that suggest we think we can actually trim the edges, and whilst the scope of risk might be that much, we can bring it down to this much, and we can potentially outperform the market. Now, a lot of these guys can't, but the better guys can. And over the last 5 and 10 years, some of the portfolios we've been working with have outperformed over 5 and 10 years of somewhere between 4 and 6%. It's quite significant. And if you go to the next step of having a look at that in the American market or global markets, it's even more profound, that over 5 and 10 years, the outperformance has been 6%, and over 10 years, it's been nearly 3%. So there are things you can do. And if you can find the right sort of investments that are going to work for you, you'll see that over a journey of time, it can make quite a bit of difference. You can see here that if you were to take an active approach, well, a passive approach over 5 years would have earned you 135,000. The active counterpart is 21% higher over 5 years and nearly 40% better over 10 years. Now, it's difficult to know exactly where to invest, but good guidance and determining what your risk versus reward profile is and how best would suit you to invest can make a significant difference over a period of time. The key points out of this that we need to look at, and strategies that I want you to think about putting in place, is that the nub of it is that you need to consider that it's all about time in the market, not trying to time it. We don't have the ability to pick winners every time, so we just want to stay the course and take the upside as it goes, knowing that it will fluctuate along the journey, but the upside seems to always bear out and get the results we want. It's about having a plan and having the discipline to stick to it. It's about sitting down with an advisor and working out what is your risk profile, what you want to get the best returns possible, but it's got to be within a bandwidth of risk that's going to allow you to sleep well at night and get you the results that you want without the risk of things going pear-shaped. It's about being well diversified and considering your risk profile, how much exposure you want towards these volatile markets, which do reward over the long term, but can be a bit of a bumpy ride along the way. So there are some of the things I want you to consider with respect to how you can invest to good best effect. The next slide I want to work into is move 3, and it's all about putting smart strategies into play. Where do you start? There are just so many things you can consider. There's all sorts of things. Is it property? Is it shares? Is it mortgage? Or is it negative gearing into another investment property? Is it using super to best effect? Whatever it might be, it's all about, as I said before, getting good advice from a good advisor to sit down and say, here's the buffet table of choice. Here's the pros and cons of all of them. Here's what works best for you. And it's really going to make a significant difference to you moving ahead. So where do you start? A couple of the most powerful strategies all revolve around where to invest. I mean, we looked at a minute ago some of the better strategies of where you can invest, but then you need to decide, do I do it in my personal name or do I do it in super? And there are a couple of key pros and cons of each of them. If you invest in your personal name, you'll see here that your money is readily accessible. You can always reach it whenever you need to, but the problem is it isn't your personal name, so you're going to be taxed at your marginal tax rate, which could be low, but it could be right up to nearly 45%, 50% of your money is going out the window. Whereas if you invest in super, it's the best thing since sliced bread from a tax perspective. In your retirement, you're not going to be paying tax at all. And at the most, even now, the most you will pay is 15%. It's absolutely brilliant. The one catch is, though, that it is all about preserving or feathering your nest for your retirement. So the money is locked down. It's what they call preserved, and you can't access it until you effectively retire, which for most people is going to be 60, 65 years old. So how does that play out? If you look at investing in your super versus your own name, let's say you figure out that you have the ability to save $10,000 of your salary or income. Say you're earning $100,000 and you work out that you can live from $90,000 because you want to accelerate towards your goals. Shortly, we're going to look at how we can find that $10,000 for you, but we've already touched on some of the better ways to invest it, but this is all about where and how you'd invest it. So you've got $10,000 you could use to better effect. You've got two key options. You can either contribute it into your personal fund or you can contribute it into your super fund. Now, the key difference here is if, let's say you're on a standard wicket of $100,000, you're going to lose nearly 40% of it in income tax. Whereas if you put it into super, you're only going to lose 15%. That's a $2,400 free kick, 24% free kick straight off the mark. So it's going to have a significant difference straight off the bat. Then let's say you take that money that you've got left over, so $8,500 left over in super, but you've only got $6,100 in your personal name because you lost that amount of tax. You decide to invest in it and you put it into the funds, and let's say they both, irrespective of where you invest, they both earn 10%. And I've chosen that number. It's probably not realistic, but it's easy for mathematics. So you make $850 in your super fund, whereas you only make $610 in your personal name. You obviously then need to pay tax on both of those. Again, you'll either pay 15% at most in super, but you could lose up to 45% of it in your personal name, so a fair amount of tax goes out the window. What it means is that if you had $10,000 of surplus income that you wanted to use to best effect, net return in 1 year in your personal name is $372. In your super fund, you nearly double it, 194%, so call it double, 722. Now, think about that year on year on year on year over the next 10, 20, 30 years. It makes a massive difference. So in that respect, super is the best thing since sliced bread. It's the closest thing we've got to a legal tax haven, but with one massive caveat that the money that you put in there is under lock and key until you basically get towards retirement. So how would that look like if you decided to adopt that approach? What I want to do is do a comparison of Jack and Diane. Let's say they're both 30 years old, they've got $50,000 in super, and they're earning $80,000. They both want to save about 10% of what they earn each year. The only difference between Jack and Diane is that Diane chooses to invest in her super, whereas Jack decides to do it in his personal name. Let's have a look at how that plays out. It makes an absolutely massive difference. You can see that Jack ends up with $1.5 million at retirement, whereas Diane ends up with $2.3 million. It's an $800,000 difference. And I'm sure you can guess, despite the fact they've already got a lot of money, an $800,000 difference can make a massive difference to the sort of lifestyle you have in retirement, what you can do for your kids, some charities you might like to support, whatever it might be. It makes a massive difference. It all comes down to what Einstein spoke about, is that compounding returns is the most powerful force in the universe. Superannuation is actually a government sanctioned tax haven that's designed and set up for the retirement you want. So use it as best you can. It's brilliant, and it should be the centerpiece of your investment strategy. But as I said, the massive caveat is you need to be careful, because the money that you put into super now is under lock and key until you hit 60, 65 years old. So as brilliant as putting money into super is, you don't want to starve on the way to the feast. So we're starting to look at some strategies here, and super is one of them. One of the big questions that financial advisors get asked all the time is, well, what about a key strategy? Do I pay down my mortgage or do I contribute to super? I actually see it as a bit of a philosophical debate. You need to think about interest rates versus investment returns, add tax into the equation, think about your time horizon and what sort of level of risk you can have. So let's have a look at interest rates versus investment returns. If you say have a mortgage at the moment that's sitting around 3%, and you decide that you've got a chunk of change that you can lend towards one or the other, and you say, I'm going to put it onto my mortgage, you basically guaranteed yourself a 3% return. Now that's great. It's a guaranteed outcome. You can't go wrong. But to earn the $10,000, you actually or to put $10,000 against your mortgage, you basically had to earn $14,000 to lose a third of it in tax to then put it onto the mortgage to get a 3% return. If you put it into super, as we saw, you get taxed a whole lot less. It could potentially, over the long term, be getting a return of 8%. And heaven knows, if there's a recovery around the corner, it could be more than that. So you've got a philosophical choice. Do I take a guaranteed 3% return, or do I put it into super, save some tax, and hope to get an 8, 10, 20% return? Could be minus 20, who knows? But on the upside and over the long term, it's somewhere between 2 or 3 times better outcome. Then you need to add tax into it, and you might find that putting it into super will add to you that 24% free kick we talked about because of the tax concessions of super, and it can make a big difference. The other one could be time horizons. Again, if you put money into super, potentially a much better outcome. However, it's under lock and key for 10, 20, 30, 40 years, however old you are. So the other one is your appetite for risk. Would I prefer a guaranteed 3% return by putting it against my mortgage, or do I want to go for the big guns and try and aim for 8% in super, knowing that it could go up and down? Some years be plus 10, other years minus 10, but the long-term average is around 8%. It can make a big difference. This is where you need to sit down with an advisor and start mapping out some strategies and some timelines, doing some projections and working out where it all comes to then. I'll show you how this can play out and how these strategies can work. So you want to make some decisions. You sit down with a good advisor to work out what your best way ahead is. Consider this scenario here. Again, we've got Jack and Diane, both 35 years old, usual sort of framework. They've got a nice house with a mortgage against it at a reasonably low rate. They're earning a reasonable quid each. They're living within their means. They've got a surplus cash flow where they can save a bit of money on an annual basis. Got their money in Australian super, because I've chosen that as a nice middle of the range, reasonable, good super fund. But what they want to do is to get ahead. So they've come to an advisor and they said, well, what's the best use of my surplus cash? So we start doing some projection modeling for them. And you can see here their base case is that at the moment they're basically spending all of their surplus money. They look at their bank account each week, think they can go out, buy shoes, booze, whatever it might be. And they're making only the minimum payments into their mortgage, but they're not doing any investing whatsoever. On those bases alone, they're going to retire 30 years later with $2.2 million. If in scenario one, they said, well, no, let's actually be a bit more sensible about it. We're only going to blow 50% of our surplus cash. We'll actually use 50% of our surplus cash flow to pay down extra payments on the mortgage. They will end up with nearly $3 million. It's a big difference. It's 29% more and $600,000 ahead. If, however, the same scenario, they decide to use 50% of their cash flow, and rather than putting it on the mortgage, they leave that at the minimum, but they put it into super and do some decent investing, and they get a better rate of return, they're going to end up with another $1 million more. So that can make a big difference as well. If you look at, say, scenario 3, where they say, right, for the next 5 years or so, or whatever it might be, we're going to knuckle down. We're not going to spend any of our surplus. We're going to put it all on the mortgage. Again, even better outcome. Or alternatively, if they say, let's split the difference because we don't know which way it's going to go, let's put half of it on the mortgage, half of it into investing, you can see it makes a massive difference. So moving from doing nothing through to using some good strategy and letting the test of time play out as it always does with Einstein's theory of compounding interest, then they can end up with an extra $2.6 million. It doubles their money and gets them a much better outcome. To put it in context, it's a journey. Those numbers are huge, but you can see here that it takes a period of time. They can end up at age 60 with 2.2 million or end up with nearly $5 million over a long journey. If we look at it in isolation and see down here over 10 years, you might not get that excited about it because it is a bit of a journey, but it's this compounding effect that Einstein speaks of that makes a massive difference. So you need to be thinking about how you can move things ahead. And this is where good financial advice gives you the choice to say, I know what I can and can't do, know what my options are, and I'm focused and motivated to make it happen. step forward in making sure we get to where we want to be is all about building financial resilience. And I do like this quote: it's not your salary that makes you rich, it's your spending habits. Far and away, one thing that a lot of people aren't totally clear on is your biggest asset is your ability to earn income. And your biggest strength is your ability to keep it and use it to best effect. So think about those things. Whatever you might have in your kit bag, the best thing you've got going is that you are a money-making machine. You go, whether it's salary or self-employment, whatever it might be, there's so many ways that you can go and earn money, and that's your biggest asset. But managing your money is more than just knowing what you've got in your bank account. It means watching what you spend, saving what you're able to, but more importantly, what the smart strategies are for what you do with it. Surplus cash flow is absolutely both the lubricant and the fuel for getting ahead. So you need to have some ability to understand where you're at and what you can do about it. Irrespective of where you're at, whether you're doing really well or whether you're doing it hard, there are plenty of ways to get ahead. But your ability to control and manage your cash flow, just like any good business actually, is what's going to turbocharge your way ahead. I mean, the issue is that nowadays, nearly every transaction we can do can be automated. You're only one click away from purchasing anything on the internet. So it's so easy to get caught up in a spending cycle and be oblivious to keeping track of where your money goes. And as a result, money management can be much trickier than it ever has been in the past. But there are strategies, approaches, tools, there's technology, all sorts of things to help. So whether you're high tech or low tech, these approaches absolutely work. They can get you focused and motivated and make a massive difference. So what it's all about is saying, well, what about if I do understand where I'm at? Map out my strategies, check and compare which are the best strategies that can give you the best outcome, the best results, the lowest possible risk, and the ones that most importantly fit in with your life that you want to lead, the life that you want to lead now and in the future. So having a professionally built before and after picture is singly the best way to get you engaged, focused, and excited about where you want to go. If nothing else, it removes the worry. It gets you motivated and you can watch the results coming along in absolute real time. What it comes down to from my perspective is whatever you do, don't do nothing. There are options out there. You just need to know what they are and get it going. You've got to plan ahead. It is so, so important. So what I want to do is the last thing, talking about building financial resilience, finding all this lubricant and fuel being excess cash flow to get you ahead. It's all about managing your money. And it's a fairly straightforward framework. There are sort of three ways of looking at your money management. You can look at, you need money obviously for everyday things like your rent, mortgage, food and bills. You should also have a rainy day account, being ready to deal with the unexpected and having an emergency fund for just in case. And thirdly, you need a third bucket of money, which is your one-day account. It's about reaching your financial goals and making the most of your money and setting up your future. Managing money is a bit like controlling what you eat. It requires commitment, determination, and discipline. And if you're halfway like a normal human being, you know that discipline is a limited commodity. It's not always easy to do. So have a plan, get motivation behind it, use technology if you need to. But you can't be that person that says, I'll start my diet tomorrow, and you never do. There are ways to get ahead. So you've probably come across some of these ideas, but this basic premise of having three different areas to put your money can flow into the traditional one that you've possibly seen before, the old 50-30-20 method, where you get your net income, you put 50% of it towards your basic living expenses, your rent, mortgage, bills, and so on, 30% towards living the life that you want, and then 20% of it goes towards saving for an emergency fund and setting up your future. I actually prefer to go one step further, and this is what we structure for you with your banking setup, is that we look at setting up what I call a money flow method. So you make your money, you have a first account where 30% of it goes on your fixed costs, whether it be your mortgage payments, your telephone bill, the things you know about. Another 30% goes on to other costs that you don't necessarily know, whether it's groceries or other expenses that come along. But then you also have money for your life account, and then we aim for that 20% surplus that's left over. Now that 20% surplus, first and foremost, goes into building an emergency fund so that you feel safe and resilient and not worried about what could potentially happen. It pays down debt that might be lagging around, and Once these two things are sorted out, then the money cascades from there into the Grow Me Fund. And that's all about getting you to where you want to be. We do this on a very specific level. We set up buckets for you. We look at your cash flow hub and say that if you can earn a net amount of $2,000 a week as a couple or whatever it might be, we're going to work out what you need for bucket 1, 2, 3, 4, and 5. And to whatever extent works for you, and this is very personal, we can either set up specific accounts, an envelope system, we can have budgeting apps, whatever works for you to get you to where you want to be, so that we're starting to build this investment bucket and working with your surplus to best effect. We'll do some analysis if you need it to work out what you've got, where you're spending your money. We reconcile you, if you want to, against the Bureau of Statistics norms of people just like you, and say, well, traditionally, someone like you would spend this amount on groceries, clothing, petrol, whatever it might be, and you can look for areas where you might be able to do better, and we can help you get there to find that surplus cash flow that is going to absolutely ignite everything you want to do and be the lubricant to getting ahead. We can recruit technology to help you get out there. There's plenty of apps that you might be using already or want to use. We have some we favor and use, but it does make a significant difference. It's all about getting your financial ducks in a row. And from my perspective, do a financial health check. Sit down with someone, either yourself, but more potentially with a financial advisor who's going to do a couple of basic things for you. We're going to set a plan up for you so that you know where you're at, where you want to go, what you have to do to get there. You have an emergency fund so you sleep well at night. You're managing your debt so that's under control. You diversified your income so that you're not vulnerable. You don't have all your eggs in one basket, and you've got a long-term vision. And to me, this is a key piece. It's almost like a vision board, if you like. If it's, stick it on the fridge if it helps, whatever it might be. But the only way to get motivated is to say, I can see the difference the before picture versus the after picture. I know where I want to go. I've got good advice. I know what my options are. I've seen the difference it can make. I've got the before graph and the after graph. I definitely want that one there. And I've got everything in place. I've straightened up all my ducks. They're in a row. I've optimized everything. I've looked for opportunities. I've minimized costs, minimized taxes, and it's all happening. That is what's going to make you much happier and get you to where you want to be. It is absolutely so worth it. So that pretty much winds me out. But if you get to those areas there, you're going to know what your options are, have control and confidence. You'll feel reassured that you've investigated all the strategy options. You've mapped out a plan. It's like a roadmap. You can see where you're going. You may or may not be recruiting technology to get you to where you want to be. And you can do it through good financial advisors. Have these really good plans that are very affordable, they're tax deductible, and it will get you to where you want to be. So really appreciate your time today. I hope it's been useful. I hope it's given you food for thought. But I want to go back to my key adage, whatever you do, don't do nothing. So on that note, I wanted to say thank you and throw it open to questions and answers as anyone sees fit.